Hi, and welcome to Drafting Compliance. I'm Kane, he's Tom, and we talked about risk assessments last time. Today, we're talking about the audit and accountability controls. But before we get to that, we have some beers. What are we drinking today, Tom?
Oh, this is going to be exciting because this is departs from what we've been drinking lately. This is
Okay.
Boulevard Breweries Tank 7 American Saison. So this would be a beer. I don't think we've tried anything like this yet, Kane.
Yeah.
The tradition of Saison's a little interesting. Saison is a French word, means season. But this is a Belgian, this variety of beer is based on a Belgian tradition. So the farmhouse ale tradition. So a lot of times these have some spices, some aromas that are not typical to the beers that we've been having. It's going to have sometimes they have a fruity undertone that's different than the citrusy stuff that we have drank in IPAs. So this is going to be a new experience. The other thing that often is in any farmhouse ale is there's probably a little sediment, and there is in this as well.
Ooh,
In the
okay,
bottom.
sediment. That'll be exciting. All right, so
So-
it's going to be the official beer of Pittsburgh. We're going to hit the gritty. Got
That's
it.
right.
And I also noticed, Tom, this has got the 8.5% alcohol. So
Yeah, I'll be honest. That's
this
not
is going to get more
typical.
interesting.
That's not typical for
Mhm.
saisons. Saisons usually are not very high alcohol, so this one is a little higher alcohol content. So let's see what it is. And this is a bottle, and it takes the old church
Yes.
key. So I'm going
I'm gonna
to
give it a
crack
go.
this beer.
The old church key right here, built into my coaster. Again, a very nice gift from a friend. Okay,
Mm,
there we go.
already has a nice aroma.
Oh my goodness, it's kind of cloudy. It's kind of sort of cloudy, kind of.
Boy, it pours with a really
Yellowish.
nice top on it. Look at that,
I
man.
might-
That's exciting.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not going to make it fit.
It's got lots
Oh,
of bubbles, so it's a little effervescent.
There's a piece of cat hair coming out of the bottle, Tom, and I'm not sure if it came with it. No, I think it. No, that's my cat just making an appearance.
Yeah.
Very small guest appearance there from my cat. One hair. So there's a lot of head on this,
That's
a lot
right.
of foam.
Put your nose
It's
in
very yellow.
Smells
I am not.
amazing.
I'm going to put my nose near it, but not
Yeah.
in it. I've learned this skill. Citrus, maybe citrus, and maybe
I smell. To me, it has some earthy
Rain?
tones, kind of, which is pretty typical of saison.
not getting the earthy tones.
Kind of a. I'm going to say almost dank is maybe the better way to say it.
Dank.
Mhm.
We're going there, are
That's-
we? You're talking to
that's-
somebody who, like, I am Scottish. I like me some nice peat, smoky, burned dirt. Right. This does not have that funk to it at all. This is very light.
All right. Well, let's put it to the test. Let's give it a go.
Yeah, we'll see how this is. If I can get through the foam. No, that was all foam. Try again.
Yeah, this has some character.
So it's basically like a latte at this point. It's all foam on top. Eventually, I'm sure I will. Hold
You've
on.
got to commit to the process, Kane.
Yeah, it's a bigger swig than I planned on.
Yeah, I mean this does not have the hoppy characteristics that we are very used to in the IPAs. This is much more on the malty sort of bitter side of beer.
Yeah, I get the bitter. It doesn't have a lot of citrus in. Like I kind of clocked that on the nose, but not on the palate. Something spicy in there.
Yeah,
Kind of like
definitely some spice in it.
Not exactly allspice, but one of the components that goes in. And it's not nutmeg. It's not cinnamon. It's the other one. Not cloves either. There's definitely some spice in there.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know my spices too well. I don't think so. I couldn't tell you what spice is in there, but I get I do get a little like grapefruit, but it's a little bit it's subtle. It's not.
As a person who likes sidecars, I can tell you this does not ring grapefruit to me. It does, however, taste like beer. I will
Thank
irrefutably, and unlike what we were drinking last time, thank goodness this actually tastes like beer. I never thought I'd be saying that, but if you haven't seen the episode with the cinnamon bun, what was it, an ale?
Yeah, cinnamon bun ale.
Cinnamon bun mistake? Yeah, go back and watch that episode.
I think we can both agree unanimously that was a mistake.
That was terrible. That was a mistake that my children have not yet let me down.
You know what's
Um,
interesting is I think both of these beers are from the same brewery. I believe that was a
are
Boulevard
they
product as well. Yeah.
really? Wow, they have a range apparently. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna noodle on this one for a little while, but until then, we're gonna be talking about FedRAMP. And so, just at the top, Tom, can you describe the key components of the audit and accountability control domain in FedRAMP R5 and the significance for cloud service providers?
Sure. So just in general, what we have here is a program that talks about what are we collecting from an audit perspective. So what events, how long are we keeping the events? How do we know that the events can't be changed? Do you have the right content in general? So FedRAMP separates it between an event type and a content of that event type. So you have to be careful on both of those pieces. So
And just to disambiguate terms at the top, Tom, when you say event, you mean like an event log entry, not like a major event.
correct. This is an event log entry. So um, uh, administrator created a new user. That's an event, right?
Okay.
Now,
And I just wanted to bring that in because in cybersecurity, we've got the language of is it an event and then is it an incident and then does the B word come in, which council would call for. All right. So, but we're talking about event logging here and it's just been kind of fancied up a bit.
that's right. But they get very specific on in that scenario I just said, admin creates a new user. What is the information that FedRAMP wants you to collect about that event? So you have to be very careful about not only are we collecting the event, this occurred, but are we collecting the correct information about how it occurred, when it occurred, how much information was sent back and forth, all of those things, all defined by FedRAMP. So there's no mystery here, Kane, about what you have to do. This is one of those control families where FedRAMP is pretty prescriptive, but you certainly have to be careful that you're getting that level of
All right.
prescription.
And now have the, we're talking, I said R5. Do the the audit controls in FedRAMP R5 differ from what was in R4, or is this just more of the same?
Well, it certainly differs, I would say, not substantively, not like in a big way, but there is language differences. There is more focus on privacy, for instance. Certainly, there's a focus here on automation that we didn't have in R4, which is nice. I mean, it's recognizing that for people like me who are in this position, we have limited budgets and we have more things to do, so we need to rely on automation. And instead of us trying to force management to see it, FedRAMP gives us the language that we can point at, which I think is really nice. There is some new control language. They may have shuffled some controls here, but the point I would take away is there's not so much substantive difference here that you're going to spend a year trying to comply with this new Rev 5 over Rev 4. It's pretty light in terms of major control changes.
Okay, so a lot of it's pretty similar. So then what would you say the biggest challenges are that organizations face when they're implementing the AU controls, and how can they effectively address those challenges?
Yeah, that's interesting. It certainly is going to, I think, be different by sort of the type of product you're pushing through. Certainly in our instance, where we have a product that is very adjacent to the security world, a lot of these controls, not only do we need to have around our application, but we need our application to provide them to our customers as well. So that's a big challenge for us. So it can be such an instance where you are having to make major changes within your application as you serve it to your customers, as they see it, in order to comply with this. And I'll give you an example of that. We've always had logging built into our platform, and we've always consumed it internally. We have not generally released it to our customers. But if we become in boundary for our customers, which we will, they need to consume this log information as well. So
we need to provide it for them and make sure we securely provide it for them as well.
That's right. So a big challenge for us was to re-architect our logging solution to be consumable by individual customers with only the data in which they should consume. So that was a big challenge for us. I think in general, if you looked at this just as a study in how you log events and analyze events, there's not a lot of brain surgery going on here. This is pretty easy to consume. It's just you have to have that capability in place in order to do it. So you need to have the platforms in place, the technology in place to do that. But again, readily available. You can choose from a handful of different providers for a logging capability and an analysis capability, all FedRAMP moderate,
Right.
ATO themselves. So,
of course, yeah. Otherwise, that would not be acceptable. So we've been kind of dancing around this, and we've said it's fairly prescriptive, and we've said there's not a lot of rocket science involved here. Um, let's get into it. Like, how does and I'm thinking of Control AU3 in FedRAMP R5. How does that dictate the content of audit records? And what challenges do organizations have in ensuring that all of the necessary information is captured in those records?
yeah. So AU3 has a lot in it and a little bit of space.
Mm-hmm.
So what AU3 is going to say is, hey, you need to collect an event. You need to know when the event occurred, where it occurred. You need to know the source and the destination of the event. So, if it was initiated from somebody out on the internet and where within the application it was actually sourced or targeted. You need to know the outcome of that event. So what actually occurred. And then you need to track who was involved in the event. So was there a user specific username? Did it affect another user username? The who of it is important. So that's one half of AU3, but there's a whole nother half of AU3 which says, hey, we also need to know very specific information that is around those event types that we wanted to collect, right? So it's going to ask you for things like, hey, the session and session state, session length. Was there a transaction of data that occurred at it? How many bytes were sent and received? Characteristics that help you identify specific identity attributes. So it might be origin of country and things like that. So there's a lot more prescriptiveness that comes with AU3 past the initial, hey, we need to collect events.
But ultimately, if you're thinking of that from like an incident response perspective, it makes sense. That's the kind of thing that, if you're on the blue team and you've just been handed something and you said, hey, go look this up, having all that supplemental rich data, I'm sure is going to make it a lot easier to do incident response.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we've probably both been involved in incidents where you're like, why don't we have better data? This would be an example of them recognizing that, right? And saying, well, let's give our folks better data.
Well, it also gets away from the problem of some former clients of mine, actually, where you go in and you're doing incident response and you ask where the log files are, and they say, oh, they routed them to dev null to save space.
Yeah.
You go, okay, sorry, I just made a Unix reference there. They deleted them automatically, or they didn't collect them, and that really complicates investigations, to put it mildly.
That's right. You asked about some of the challenges. I think of the challenges here more around resetting the expectations of certain key stakeholders. So for instance, your lead of engineering or your head developer, he's probably made it a practice to try to minimize space consumed, especially in the cloud, right? Because space is cost and people are sensitive to cost, and he wants to have only what he needs to see. So you may have a challenge re-educating that individual and saying, well, what you've done always is no longer acceptable for FedRAMP. They have much more stringent, and we have to keep them much longer than you have in the past. And you're going to get pushback on the amount of space it takes and how hard it's going to be to parse and all of this. But the reality is that's a challenge more on the diplomatic side and in the political side of your organization than it is on the technical side, but still one you're probably going to face.
But also, like you said at the top, if you've got existing commercial product and you're trying to re-engineer it or re-architect it for FedRAMP, it sounds like the logging provider and the log sources consumers are probably a challenge, as well as actually what you're collecting in those logs. Some of those might have been things that a purely commercial organization that hasn't been through a significant incident probably wouldn't think to have in a log file or in an event record, right?
Correct. And I think that's really why it's so specific in terms of what it wants there.
All right. Yeah. Well, if you're enjoying this conversation today on YouTube, ring the bell to get notifications about my quest to find literally any beer that's drinkable, or subscribe to this in your podcast app of choice to make this part of your monthly routine. And Tom, I want to ask about the context of Control AU6. How do organizations under FedRAMP conduct effective audit review, analysis, and reporting? And what tools or what processes are really crucial for that process?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting. We just talked about the level of specificity that are wanted in logs, right? And so when you're collecting that much data across your entire footprint or your entire boundary, you're creating reams of data, and it's very hard to analyze manually. In fact, you can't do it.
Hmm.
I think any auditor would recognize that you can't do it. So really, what this is saying is go out and find a tool that helps you manage the burden of reams of data in the analysis. So this is really talking about get a sim tool, something
Right.
that can analyze. I have my requirements around sim tools. Most people do. You want a tool that isn't just signature based. You want a tool that looks at anomalous behavior as the same severity as just a signature. You want a
Hmm.
tool that helps reduce over time the false positives, so you're getting
Hmm.
truer and truer data, which if anybody who's configured a sim understands how every tool comes out of the box is going to create false positives. But you ultimately want to get to the point where what it's presenting to, I think the requirement is to an admin on a weekly basis, although if you're only doing it weekly, I think that's probably a mistake. But whatever it presents
Yeah.
to you um, is data that you absolutely have to follow up on. It's an event that should mean something
Hmm.
to you. That's what this control is all about, is how do you get to that point where you are analyzing data that is impactful to your environment in a timely way. So go find a sim that is FedRAMP authorized and implement it, and make sure you get it to the point where it is giving you the least amount of false positives as possible.
So I want to push on that one a little bit,
Sure.
Tom, just to clarify. So you said use a SIM tool, which some of our viewers or listeners may think of as a SIEM tool, security incident event
Mhm.
monitoring tool specifically. Um, Here's the question though. I know a few CISOs, one at a retail company, that are using data lakes as opposed to a traditional SIEM or SIM to do large scale analysis because they said, well, for our environment, we're special. And because of the scale, we are just going to dump everything in data lake and trawl through it, and have apparently built very customized processes for that. So would that be applicable if they stored their data lake up in FedRAMP, or is it so prescriptive that says, no, you all have to use a SIM that is FedRAMP moderate?
No, I mean, certainly they're alluding to a sim. I would challenge that data lake is a sim. I mean, it's still doing the same base function. It's looking through a pool of
Hmm.
data and finding anomalous activity and reporting it as something that needs to be followed up upon. That's what a sim does, or a SIEM. I think that's a colloquialism depending on where in the country you live. But
I think so.
but the point of that point is you can't do this manually. So however you get to the point where you have routine analysis and you have degraded the number of false positives that come out of it, so you're not there's not that call, what is it, call wolf, or what, cry wolf. There's not a cry wolf
Cry wolf.
scenario going on
Right.
constantly in your environment. I knew I'd get there. It's been a while since I've done fairy tales, but the point is you want to have data that is actionable, that makes your security team stand up and say, I need to follow up on this. Not one
Mhm.
that says, oh, there's 16 in the queue again, and only one of those could potentially be anything, and it's probably minor. That's what happens. The noise creates desensitized people if you have a tool that is very noisy and false positives. So
Very true. But also, it has to have some way of identifying true positives and not reducing the false positive and the perceived false positive rate to the point that there's nothing in the
yeah,
queue.
that's right. You don't want to have
Because
the
that
other
also
problem, which
tends
is
to be a little
false.
bit worrisome as well,
Yeah,
where
false
you
negatives are
have
bad.
nothing and you think everything's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, cool. So we've kind of set this technology apart. So you don't have to have a sim to do it. But you do have to have some level of automation. What are the other key strategies and technologies then to protect the audit information? And I'm thinking of the AU9 control under FedRAMP. And how do those strategies really mitigate the risk of unauthorized access to all of this valuable log data?
Yeah. So AU9 talks all about how do you keep your how do you ensure that your log data is immutable, essentially. So it's
Hmm.
not deleted. It's uh, it's irrefutable. So a person can't say, no, I didn't do that, which means you have controls around how that data can and cannot be changed. This is critical. And most of your modern tools should come with that capability. So again, I'm talking about SIM tools. This, I believe, nods to a SIM tool, but you can certainly input those controls around a data lake as well. But you're talking about having a storage set that is stored encrypted, that is not does not have the ability to go in and just blanket delete. You have to have very stringent controls around how that data can be moved. Very stringent controls about who can get in it. So in the case of most organizations, you want a very limited number of folks that can get to the source data. Maybe not the front end that connects to the source data, but the source data itself. So you have to be very, very careful about how you architect your solution. Most modern SIMs will come with this capability built in. So for instance, your Splunks and your Elastics of the world will have a back end that is immutable.
Right. And that's really important because otherwise well, I'm sure it could be thrown into question as to who really did what if you're missing audit records, which
That's right.
I know I have seen threat actors go after that in the past before immutable storage was standard. The other thing I'm thinking about, Tom, here is we're talking about storing a lot of event data, right? A lot. And under AU 11, what are the requirements for audit record retention? And really, how are organizations supposed to balance the need for long-term retention of this event data with the challenge of all of this data storage and management, especially for immutable storage?
Yeah, this to me is a confusion point around this control family. So you'll see folks out on the internet say, you only need to keep retention for 90 days. And I believe that isn't the case, but I believe that they put imprecise language here, and they make a mistake where they point to a standard that was written by the what is it called, the OMB, Office of Management and Budget. So when you point to a standard like that, people are like, well, what is an M standard? I don't know that. It's not like NIST or some of the other, I would say, commonly known standards. It's not an SP, for instance. So you really want to go and reference the standard. It's M-21-31, I think is the correct standard, but it's referenced in FedRAMP in small language, and you have to actually align to that standard with your retention. So when you go and read that standard, again, you're going to have some ambiguity there, but most experts in the field have come down to say what they're really saying is you need to retain records for 1 year. So you want 1 year of log retention, and you decide how much of that you want as hot and how much of that you want as cold. I'm choosing to do 90 days of hot in the remaining year and cold. But it's as clear as mud if I'm being honest, and you have to really sort of like connect dots and read between lines to get to that understanding.
But it's a year with a rolling deletion period at the end of that year, just to manage the amount of data.
Yeah, it specifies. There's some controls around that, right? So it doesn't say you have to delete, so you can maintain longer.
Sure.
But if you're an information security guy who's ever talked to a lawyer, you want to delete the data as soon as you can.
Yes.
You also, there's controls around how that data rotates if there is a denial of service that occurs within your logging environment. So, it's pretty common, especially I would say 10 years ago, to kill log systems by just overwhelming them with log entries. So the standard is delete oldest in this scenario, which I want to have a significant runway ahead of me before I have to delete anything in that event, because you don't want to lose your ability to track, but it is specified within FedRAMP that's how you deal with that scenario.
That makes sense, especially if it's a denial of service as part of a tar pitting attack when the logs are just going to come in later. I could see that being about a year, give or take. Talk to counsel and adopt for your own organization. Sound fair?
That's correct. Yeah, that's true. Totally fair.
Fantastic. Well, I think we've hit that point of the day where we need to talk about this American Saison by Boulevard Brewery.
Boulevard Brewery. Let's see, how much have you drank there, Kenny?
Where is Boulevard Brewery based out of? Hang on, I've still got some left in the bottle.
I feel like that's
based out of.
I feel like that's a Colorado brewery. But let me see.
Well, the whole time I've been thinking about it is like we've got Boulevard Park here in Bellingham.
Oh no,
And
Missouri. Sorry, Kansas City.
okay. Ooh, barbecue. All right. So Tom, do you want to go first on this one, or should I go first?
I'm happy to go first. So
okay, I'm going to try take another sip while you do that.
This beer has certainly grown on me as we've talked. It has spicier notes than I would expect, and they come on the front of the tongue, which is a bit of a surprise. A lot of time, those spicy notes are kind of the linger back end of a beer. I like it. It's got a lot of character. It's got a lot of malty stuff. Not a lot of hop, which I'm a fan of the hop, but I'm also a fan of beer in general. So, if I think of this in terms of what it is, the Saison, I'm going to rate this very high. I think it's a 7. If you talked about, hey, Tom, are you going to go pick this first off the shelf? Probably not, because it's not hoppy. It's not an IPA, which my beer fridge is dominated by IPAs. But I would keep this around. Like, I'll keep this around and I'll drink it on specific occasions, usually associated with like, hey, we got some family over and we're going to drink one beer or something like that. It's got that kind of a appeal and character to me. It's particularly good in winter. So yeah, I'm giving it a 7, Kane.
Tom, I need to come to your family gatherings if you only need one drink to get through them.
Depends on which family members are coming over.
Well, in my case, I've had another sip of this, and at the top of the show, it was more interesting than it is now. I mean, obviously, it's still got foam on top, but it reads a little flat and kind of dull. Like at the beginning, I was at least getting spice notes off of it. Now it just kind of tastes like beer. It does not. If nothing else, I have learned now what hops taste like, and that I do not like them. I also can say this is less bitter than it was at the top of the show.
Yeah, it opened up.
Which is kind of an interesting thing. It's changed over time. Yeah. In terms of would I, go to a family dinner at Tom's house and get through it with only one of these? Depends on the conversation. If we've been pre-gaming, I think that would be the big question there. I would not stock this in my fridge. I don't have. Actually, most of my friends point out I barely have anything in my fridge on a given day. That's just how it is. I'm going to give this I'm going to give it a solid 3. I was debating there between a 3 and a 4, and then I had to remember what a 1 was, and I was thinking of how terrible that was. This is not a 2 either. It's definitely
firmly in the 3 slot.
Yeah, it's firmly in the 3 out of 10 scale.
Right.
It's fine.
The fact that you've learned to delineate to that level is a huge win for me, Kane. So I'm happy about that.
Well, we also needed to find a 1, and the cinnamon bun ale. That was a 1 because we do not have a 0 on the show, unfortunately. Bit of a pity that we ever redo this.
I do feel good about rating this a little higher after being so brutal to the cinnamon bun ale. Pull Boulevard probably.
You were not brutal. We were accurate.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, with that, that's all for today. If you think you know a beer that I'd like, or that Tom would like, or if you have FedRAMP questions, drop them in the comments below. And remember to like our LinkedIn and YouTube pages to hear live interviews with information security professionals. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.